Hello my friends, welcome back for some more Oxygen Not Included tutorials. Today we're going to be talking about something that I've kind of glossed over in a handful of videos, which is pretty essential once you get to like the mid-game and start advancing into the later stages of the game. This was also something I was a little bit intimidated by when I was a newer player, so I just figured we might as well put together a quick video to talk about this one. I say quick and watch this be like another 50-minute video, but you know, whatever. Or a multi-hour one. Anyway, this is all about producing steel, so I'm going to try to keep this pretty straightforward and pretty simple, because it's not the craziest thing, but it also is a pretty, like, landmark part of the game, and there's lots of stuff that you might need to know before just jumping into this headlong. So, let's first just talk about the building that you would need to make steel anyway, which is going to be this, well, actually, let me back up. If I could do, like, the impression of rewinding a tape, I would definitely do that. A bunch of people are like, what's a tape? So the purpose behind steel, the main purpose anyway, is because there's going to be a lot of times where you need buildings that are going to be able to handle a lot of heat. So for example, these aqua tuners that I built in like the mid-game solutions video, which is what this map is from, by the way. I built those out of steel because they can resist the heat that's going to be going on in here. If I have steam, and if the steam is going to get super hot, the steel doesn't care. It's going to be fine. My buildings won't be damaged by that. Same thing goes for something like this. If I have natural gas that's coming out at a really high temperature, the steel can resist it. So that's one of the biggest reasons why you'll want steel. The other reason is once you start getting out into space, the only real way to deal with meteor strikes is going to be buildings that are made out of steel. And especially for rocketry as well, you're going to need a lot of steel for that. So this is something that once you cross those mid-game thresholds, or maybe even a little bit before that, you want to start thinking about producing steel and maybe plastic, which I'll talk about in another video, before you can really advance those later stages of the game. So let's talk about steel. Steel is something that's very hard to come by naturally, but there is a way to kind of hack that around that. If you want to get an initial burst of steel for maybe your first gas pumps or something, like let's say you want to capture this, what you can do is you can mine your way up to the top of the map, and if you can find a place that looks like this, and kind of dig your way over there. You might need a spacesuit or something like this. Maybe not, depending on the circumstances. But once you get in here, you can just go ahead and build something like this and build some ladders up here. And you'll notice they're already missing, but what I'm going to be directing you to is building ladders up to these things. There are windows right here that spawn in this point of interest that are made out of steel. So you can deconstruct them. You can see the blobs that are on the ground here because I deconstructed them earlier in this run. But it gives you a fair amount of steel pretty early. Each one of these looks like it's about 400 kilograms, plus I think 100 for the door. This door right here can be deconstructed for steel. That's already a lot to get started. So you could get this early on and use the steel on the things you absolutely need to use. The big candidates for this, I would probably say, are going to be, like I mentioned before, the pump to get any natural gas out. You may need 2 or 3 of these, I don't know. And then if you need one for an aqua tuner, that could also be a thing. These are very expensive, by the way, so you might have enough for 1 or maybe 2, depending on what's out there. No, only 1, I think, because these are going to be 1,200. And there are 4 windows and 1 door, which I think gives you 1,700. So if you need one of those for an aqua tuner really quick, or if you need some of them for pumps, this is the first place I would go. You might be a little bit intimidated about getting out into this space biome as well. But this is one of the first things that I recommend new players to do, mostly so that you have a place to vent any gases that you don't want. But it's also going to have the side effect of very easy steel access as soon as you're ready to enter the mid-game. So just get out here. If you can get out at a point that's close to one of these points of interest, that'll make it a lot easier. You won't necessarily need suits. You can see Max running around out here without a suit. The reason that you might need it eventually is because it will eventually get very hot out here. So if you wait too long, you might need to get suits up before you can start venturing out here. So that's source number 1 for steel. But number 2, and the far more common source, is going to be the metal refinery, which is going to be this building right here. Hey, I said a building name correctly without looking at it first. All right. It's going to look like this. So this metal refinery was something that I was a little bit intimidated by when I first started. Mostly because of the amount of power that it takes, and it says that it produces superheated liquid. I can't remember if it still says that exact phrasing anymore, but that alone was like, oh, this is kind of scary. I think now it says significantly heats and outputs the liquid piped into it. I was a little bit scared by this, and I didn't really know why I was going to be using it. All of my metal refining needs up to that point were taken care of by this, the rock crusher, so I was like, I don't know. And then I started to realize how valuable steel really was, as I needed some of these mid-game solutions and some of the later game solutions, and I was like, oh, alright, well I guess I better figure out how to use this. So like it alludes to, this is where you can produce steel. We can look at the ingredients that are required here, which is iron, and this is the refined iron, by the way, not iron ore. Refined carbon and lime. I'm going to talk about how to get each of these things, plus the 2 other things that you really need to run this. One of which is power, by the way. This thing takes an insane amount of power. You can take a look at the requirements here. 1,200 just to operate this, which is a tremendous amount. By comparison, that's like having 2 coal generators running permanently just for this one building whenever it's being used. So that's a big part of it. The coolant is something that it also alluded to, and that was the thing that I was a little bit scared of, but there's some good solutions out there, so we'll talk about that. So when you're ready to start refining, or rather manufacturing steel, what I would recommend is building something that looks like this configuration. I would build a metal refinery, I would build a kiln, and you can leave a space here if you want to. I like to, so I can keep my shipping stuff there. And then a rock crusher on the other side. And I usually build it in this room next to all my power stuff, because if I need to cool this area for whatever reason, I usually will bring cooling in, which you can take a look at this piping here really fast. I have other videos that are about cooling and stuff like that, but suffice it to say, I build it in this room both for the cabling convenience and for the cooling that I'm probably already going to be doing here. So yeah, if you need any directives on power as a whole or cooling as a whole, I do have separate videos for those for sure. So check those out if you need to know more about it. But if you're comfortable with that, I'd set it up something like this. The reason why I would do this is because this is going to be where you're going to produce all the materials that you need for steel. The kiln is going to be where you make refined carbon, and you just use coal for that. And the rock crusher is where you're going to be making lime. And this is a big portion of steel. And really another reason why I recommend getting on ranching as soon as possible, because one of the biggest ways to get lime is from these eggshells. Let's talk about how I would ship to this type of setup, and then we'll talk about how to get the individual supplies here in just a bit. So refined carbon is really obvious. That's the easiest one. We'll talk more about lime in a bit, and we'll talk more about iron in a bit. So let's talk about shipping. So in a place like this, I alluded to this a little bit in my mid-game solutions video. I would normally have shipping set up somewhere in the mid-game or somewhere exiting the mid-game probably. I would definitely have it up before I could stabilize on food, because this is going to allow me to produce a lot of extra meat and kind of ship it down to an area where I drown the contents of it, which they should have died by now, I think. Ship the contents of the eggs so that when the eggs hatch, they turn into meat, and then I have free food. So that's what I would do. Shipping is also another tutorial that I have if you want to check that out and learn more about that, but let's just assume that you know a decent amount about shipping before moving into this section. So what I would do is I would just set up something like this, and everything that was produced in this room, I would ship it out somewhere. What I typically do with shipping, you don't necessarily have to do it this way, is I like to ship it to some central location, somewhere near my printing pod, so that I can sort anything that comes out of the pod as well. So let's say we set it up something like this, and you can set these up to take whatever you want. For now, I'm just going to take the eggshells and maybe the eggs or something like that. It'll take me forever to clear all this other stuff out of here, which you can do, but it can be a little bit of a chore. So if I want to grab stuff out of here, I want to get all the eggs. I want to get the eggshells, which are under organic, which we can worry about the rest of this some other time as well. And I would just set it up something like this. And what should happen once we hook it up to power is, I'm going to be very sloppy about this, by the way. There we go. Is they should grab all the eggshells, they'll drop them in these conveyor loaders, and they'll ship them down to a central location. And this can be from a bunch of different sources. Since I'm shipping my eggs here as well, I might want to actually grab the eggshells from this place also. So, I don't know, let's just throw this together really fast. And I would just ship them all on the same line to eventually drop out at the same point. We'll get to why this is relevant here in just a second. I realize this might seem like a non sequitur, but it does matter, so. Alright, so let's ship some eggshells from here also. Eggshell. So as I'm getting eggshells and as I'm ranching my critters and stuff, a lot of eggshells, a lot of eggs, a whole bunch of other junk could fall right here, and I might want to sort it and send it to different places. I talk about this a lot in my shipping video about what the best ways are to sort things. The cheap way and kind of the lazy way to do this is just to set up an auto sweeper that's right next to the pod, so you can grab whatever you need out of there. And then just set up a bunch of conveyor loaders depending on the supplies that you might need to take somewhere. The different places these could go, for example, is you could ship food over to this area so that you wouldn't have to have your duplicants carrying it. You could ship the eggs down to here and then just ship out the eggshells and the meat once they hatch and die. But what we're going to be interested in are the materials that we might want to ship down here. So let's say that we get it from the printing pod or we get it from some other shipped location. Let's just set one of these to take the materials that we know that we want down there. So what we want down there is anything that could produce lime, anything that might be used for the kiln, which you could actually just ship that here and have your duplicants take the refined carbon over. It's kind of up to you. You could also do this another way where you set up a conveyor receptacle for coal separately if you wanted to ship some coal down there, but not all of it. There's a lot of different schemes you could do for this, but the biggest one is focusing on the different sources you could get lime from. So if we look at this, there's a bunch of different jobs here you could get from lime, like poke shell melts, either the small ones or the large ones. Here's that recipe for eggshells, so I want to produce that forever. And then fossil. If I happen to find any fossil, which is usually down in the oil biome, I'll want to ship that back here as well if it happens to be in my shipping network. If not, my duplicants will eventually run it there, but the ideal thing to do is just to have a constant circulation of eggs and eggshells and just ship the shells and anything else back down there. So among the things that we might want to ship down to that location, let's just not assume coal because there's a couple of other ways to do that. So I'm going to not assume coal, but you could ship coal down there if you wanted to. But you, like I said, you might want to ship coal to your power stations anyway, and these will use up way more than you will use here. So I don't know. I don't think it's that worthwhile. So let's skip that, but let's send some lime. I don't think we've actually produced any yet, which is why I don't have it on my filters. So let's go ahead and just brush some in and mine it out really fast. Whoops. Whatever. There. So let's say that we have it accepting lime, which is a possibility from the printing pod. So I'll have it ship any lime that we find down there. We'll have it ship any eggshells, which is the whole thing that started this big dependency chain. And anything else that might cause us to need to produce anything, like these 2 molts. So let's spawn those just because I don't think that I've actually discovered them on this run. There we go. And for what it's worth, I don't think these things are worth ranching just for this. This is one of the least useful critters in the game for what it's worth. I think you're better off by just getting your ranching up for food and then enjoying the eggshells as a side effect. So industrial ingredients, let's send these 2 poke shell molts. And then we'll also probably want to send any iron ore that we find down there. And maybe even if we find any refined iron, we could send that down there as well, which I don't even know if we have any. We haven't discovered it yet either. Iron. There. And then refined metal, iron. So this is all the supplies that I could potentially need to make steel, with coal being excluded for right now, but yeah, do with that what you will. So I'd hook these all up to power. There we go, something like this. And then the thing that was asking for lime, we're just going to run a line from that all the way down to a drop-off point that is near where we are manufacturing all this stuff so that we don't have to have duplicants running it back and forth all the time. Then what you can do is you can drop an auto sweeper in the middle of all this so that it'll load all of the buildings. So if it happens to find any lime or poke shell molts or whatever nearby or any iron ore, it could put all this stuff in the places that it needs to go in order to make what you need. So what should happen is it'll start shipping the eggshells down. I think it grabs some of those poke shell molts as well. Maybe not. Looks like a duplicant picked it up and carried it there. So now if we put these jobs to produce lime on basically constantly, you'll probably want to have an operator dupe that is specialized for this type of job and for manufacturing steel just to continuously make the stuff that you need. So yeah, that kind of covers us on iron and refined carbon. Once again, I would just queue this up every once in a while. You don't need to have this on infinitely. Whenever I'm out, I usually will do something like this. Like 80 of these will last you a really long time when producing steel. So that's typically what I do. The number is not that important, but it's pretty high. The max you could do is 99. I don't think it matters too much. Just make sure you have the coal to push this. Alright, so let's talk about how to actually get refined iron, because that's something we haven't talked about quite yet. We're already shipping metal ore down here, so one of the options you could do is you could actually refine it through this as well. The only downside is you're going to be spending a lot of power, and potentially a lot of cooling needs are going to be generated because you're generating iron this way. So this is what I would probably call option B. Option C, which is worse, I would say to refine it from here because it's going to be a lot less heat, but you're going to just get less iron out of it. It literally says inefficiently produces refined materials here on this building, so you could do it here, but it's not great. The best thing to do is I haven't talked about this yet, by the way, but if you eventually got to this point, I would start trying to specifically grow a colony of smooth hatches. And the reason why this is a good idea is because these smooth hatches, they will stop producing coal. Like, they don't produce coal like these other ones, so you could have them in tandem with these guys as well. Maybe have another chamber. I'm just doing it this way because it's more convenient. But these smooth hatches could potentially eat your iron ore, and they will excrete refined iron at 75% of the rate. This is better than the rock crusher, which is why I say the rock crusher is the worst. But it's not quite as good as the metal refinery. However, I still say this is a good idea because you're going to want the eggshells once again anyway. You'll want the meat anyway. But also, this is a very low power, low heat type of solution. You're literally just grooming these critters to refine metal for you. And that's something where if you have one or maybe two of these chambers, that could be all of the metal refining you need for the whole game. And you could feed them all different types of metals so that you could use it for different construction projects. So this is what I would call option A for getting iron. I would call option B this, refining the iron here, and I'd call this option C. So if you can find time to get these smooth hatches out, then I would definitely do that. Very quickly, and I haven't talked about ranching hatches specifically yet, but the progression for this is that you will need to feed, or you'll probably want to feed these regular hatches a certain thing to make them produce stone hatches. And then stone hatches have a chance of laying eggs for smooth hatches. You can also influence that by feeding them iron ore or something like this as well, some kind of metal. So like you can feed them gold amalgam, for example. But this is the progression. You'll go from this to this to this. And if you eventually have a crew of these guys refining metals for you, that really takes a lot of the strain off of any cooling or any power that you might need to do otherwise. Okay, let's very quickly talk about power, and then we will talk about the most complicated part of this, which is the coolant. Power is something that I've addressed several times, and I just barely addressed this on this same map in my last video, which was how to deal with all the mid-game problems. And one of the keys of dealing with those mid-game problems is finding a lot of different power sources. So I would definitely say if you're interested in refining any steel or creating steel, you need to have a very solid power network up, because once you add this, once you might need to start adding aqua tuners or something like that, you're going to have huge power demands, and if you can't deal with that right away, that's going to be pretty bad for you. So yeah, I would definitely recommend having a stable power grid. For a very quick recap, I think that you need to make sure that you have a good amount of hatches that are regularly producing coal for you and have a good amount of coal generators. I have 3 here. You could potentially go up to like 4 or 5. I would also make sure you have at least a couple of natural gas points captured. So there's one here, there's one down here, and again, I do talk about these in a few other videos, so I think I'm just going to skip most of that about how to capture those. And if you can afford to get down in the oil biome and create your petroleum generators by this point, that would be really good, because a lot of times with how much power this consumes, it'll kick on your petroleum generators shortly afterward, and that'll kind of be the buffer to make sure your base doesn't run out of power when you're trying to make some steel. So yeah, once we got those things going on, once again, I'm going to stress this will generate a fair amount of heat, so just make sure you have some kind of coolant solution like this. Check out the cooling video or the mid-game video if you need to know the specifics of how to set up cooling of something like this, but it doesn't need to be overly complicated. The biggest thing you need to worry about with any kind of coolant is you need to worry about what you're passing into the refinery. So what happens, for example, I'm going to set this up the bad way. So let's say if I have some water here, and I'll show you guys what'll happen if this does it this way. Say we take some water and we send it up into here, and then we send it into the inlet for the metal refinery. It's going to be a requirement for you to send coolant into this, and any liquid will work, but let me show you why water and regular water is a pretty bad idea. Where can I hook this up to? Here we go. So we'll start sending water up here. this refinery can only be used once the coolant actually fills up. So you'll see this meter on the front of here actually fill up when you have enough coolant. And then you need to have a pipe that goes out to send the hot water or liquid wherever. We'll worry about this in a bit, but I'm just going to dump it out for right now. And this is not what I would recommend long term. I'm just doing this for the sake of speed. So let's say we dump it out. Let's say we dump out all the hot liquid like right here. I would not normally do this, but, you know, whatever. So let's start queuing up some steel. And this arm will start... I call these arms. They're called auto sweepers. I think I've just played too much Factorio. But this will go ahead and just load this up, and it'll get the materials in there that it needs. And as soon as this is full on coolant, a duplicant should come over here and start producing us some steel. Keep in mind, you can see the contents of this. I'm storing water at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And the threat here is that it's going to significantly heat the liquid. So let's see what happens when we use regular water and why I would not do this. So Gossman's going to start refining. It's going to start sucking in some more water because we're now spending the coolant. As soon as they're done, which they're running out of oxygen here, by the way. I need to be less sloppy about this. Not natural gas, not chlorine. I want this. You will want this in a well-ventilated area, by the way. I'll usually build this up at the top, but yeah. Alright, let's get back to refining, or is everyone going to sleep right now? Oh, it looks like I got these guys on a different shift. So once we finish this up, you'll see it start dumping out coolant. But since we sent in regular water, we're going to start getting this heat damage because this is actually producing steam. Considering it heated up the water so much that it just turned it into a gas. So it'll break your pipes, it'll cause all kinds of mess. It'll overheat this section really easily because you're literally just releasing steam into this. So this is definitely not a solution I would recommend. Let me show you what I would recommend, though. There's a whole bunch of steam coming out of this, by the way, because I emptied it out. And you can see how much this actually is if I were just to deconstruct the building. It's a lot. So this is definitely not a good idea. Sending in regular water, I think, is just not viable for this whatsoever. So let's talk about the best solution. The best solution, and this is once again where I'm going to really annoy people and say, get out on the map and explore. Because one of the best solutions is something you can actually find buried on the map. It doesn't spawn on every single map, but if it does, it's one of the best things in the whole game. And this, I've said this a few times. This is one of the best things for this reason, and partly this reason. So if you happen to find... Let me get this set up here really quickly. Close all these categories. If you happen to find a cool slush geyser, this is just going to flat out solve the problem entirely. So let's say you find a cool slush geyser. It looks something like this. It produces polluted water at 14 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 10 Celsius. This is ridiculously cold polluted water. If you were to send it into the refinery, it would heat it up a decent amount, but it would go up to a temperature that's already like drinking water temperature. Like, it would not be a threat to overheat your base whatsoever if you were to do something like that. So this, if we're talking about option A, B, C, as far as coolant, this is option A as far as I'm concerned. If you get your hands on something like this, I would honestly just hook it straight up to your refinery and call it good. Like usual with these things, you will want to store some kind of runoff. So you want to use these liquid reservoirs on there and store it, maybe something like this. You could store it on location too if you really wanted to. It doesn't really matter that much. And then I would put a pump here. Done this so many times. I'd put a hydro sensor on here to make sure that what's in there is worth pumping out. Set it to above, I don't know, 150, sure. And then I would just pipe it like so. Out of the pump, into these tanks, and then back out of the tanks into my refinery. As for the water that comes out of here, I could do a whole bunch of different things with it. I could just refine it and put it back into my water network. So I could pour it in here after I refine it. So you could just do something like this, a water sieve. I could send it up into the sieve. I won't hook this up all the way, by the way. I'll just continue to dump things over here on the ground because I'm being lazy. But I would send it into a sieve and then have it go into my water network of some sort. Would be the best way to do it because once it comes out, we'll be able to see the temperature. It's really not bad if it's coming from this cool slush geyser. So for now, like I said, I'm just going to send this into a different pool. Like I'll very quickly make a pool that will show us what's actually coming out of this just so we can see the temperature of it. But what you do with this is kind of your decision. We won't get up to really strict builds until a little bit later. Get out of here, Morb. Alright, so let's rebuild our metal refinery here, and let's get this show on the road. Alright, so metal refinery coming up. You can queue the steel infinitely if you want to, by the way. I will usually queue up a certain amount, otherwise I'll wind up producing way too much a lot of the time. Typically, your biggest limiting factor on this is going to be the lime itself. So yeah, it's just something to think about. Alright, let's get the rest of this hooked up really fast. I'm going to spawn some polluted water in here that's of the same properties, and we'll just see what the effects are. So I'm going to send it in. I don't know why I built this way. That was kind of silly. There we go. I'm going to send it in from the cool Slush Geyser. Let's go ahead and paint some of that in. Polluted water. 14 degrees Fahrenheit. There we go. So these overflow tanks are just so that we have any extra coolant on hand, just in case we're not using it up fast enough for whatever reason. So that when we are ready to use it, we have a whole bunch ready for us. Let me put this into super speed really quick so we can fill up this machine. And so our duplicants will come over here and get to work. I think that the super speed is messing this up in some way. Something weird's happening. Or maybe they're just going on break. Yeah? You on break? Yeah, okay, everyone's on break. Alright, let's super speed this again. So they go on their break, they go to sleep, and they come back and work for us. Which seems to happen like once per video, by the way. These duplicants really know how to pick a bad time. Alright, Gossman's back doing their job. So they should finish up with this pretty soon. The water is going in at about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And since it's polluted water, it's going to be able to absorb a lot more heat. Coming out at about 115. That's really not that bad. It's not cold by any means when it comes out, but 115, if I was cycling this back into my water system, maybe cooling it back down and feeding it to plants, or maybe it was being used for oxygen, or getting cycled into my bathrooms or something like that. Like, that's not really a surprising amount of heat. And this is also a very cheap and quick solution to deal with this. So that's why I say this is option A. You can just hook it straight up. You can basically not worry about it for the rest of the game. The side effects is that you will be generating some heat, but like most of the water that you harvest on the map, like for example, if we look at this water geyser, where is it? Up here? This already produces water that's way hotter than what we're using anyway, so I mean, this is almost arguably better than the water that's coming out of a lot of the other geysers to be circulated around your base. So this seems like a great solution to me. I would definitely recommend this. Let's talk about option B. Let's say we couldn't find one of those things, but we happen to find a polluted water vent. You can do the exact same thing, just hook it straight up. It will wind up producing pretty hot polluted water, which, of course, fine, like we kind of expected that. This comes out at a temperature of 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 Celsius, and it'll come out obviously warmer. I mean, you can just do the math. It'll be at about 180, 190 Fahrenheit. A little bit close to boiling, but still colder than what comes out of the other geysers. So this still seems like another totally viable option. And I'm going to talk about what happens if you don't actually have that, by the way. Alright, I'm trying to see what is coming out of here. I think we're still getting a bunch of the colder water, so we need to let this flush for just a little bit so we can see what the actual temperature is coming out. With the polluted water vent rather than the cool slush geyser. There we go, 169 Fahrenheit. Nice. So yeah, it's still warm, but this is still yet another very quick and easy solution. Once again, I would make sure that you are storing this on location, which I was not doing in that video because I was messing around with this a little bit too fast. So I would store something on location or store it in some tanks nearby or something like that, just to make sure to capture the overflow, because you don't want to waste any potential water that could have come out of here. Just do something like this. There. And if you're not producing stuff as fast, again, these tanks will just fill up with backup water. That's totally fine to grab. Even when I don't have it hooked up to any kind of outlet, this is filling up with very cold, polluted water, so very worthwhile. Alright, let's say for whatever reason, and this is possible, that you don't spawn with either a cool slush geyser or a polluted water vent on your map. This is what I think is option C, and to be totally fair and totally straightforward about this, I have done a lot of schemes for creating steel in the past that were not that great. So one of my thoughts originally was to use oil as a coolant, and then to transform that into petroleum via my... where is this? Via my oil refinery, and then send the petroleum into generators or into some kind of plastic making machine. The benefit of this is that the material that's absorbing all the heat is eventually destroyed, but it also is still heating up my base quite a bit. So I think your next best bet with this, and this is just something that I've labbed out, is to probably just hook it straight up to your crude oil. Like this, which we might need a secondary line, but we have crude oil being pumped from the bottom of the map here. I have not made a specific crude oil tutorial, by the way, so we'll get to that eventually, but this is going to be something that I think is very useful for steel, and maybe kind of a little bit of an advanced concept. What I would do with this, and I'm just going to be kind of messy about this, you could have this at a different location that's a little bit further away, but I'm just going to dig all this stuff out really quickly, because we're going to need to make a special setup for this. What I'm going to do in short is I'm going to utilize the extra heat that's produced from this refinery and turn it into energy via a steam turbine. A sturm turbine. So what I would do... Let me mop all this up and get all this stuff out of the way, by the way. Let me clear the floor. Oh, that was a weird noise. So what I would do with something like this is I would start to create a setup with some kind of refined metal, ideally. You'd have a room where I would have some very hot oil sitting. This would be connected to another chamber on top of it, which was filled with steam. And then that would connect to a steam turbine. And the whole idea with this is, and I'm debating of how much detail I need to go in with this. Let's just say we build this with the gas still in here. Let's do this the right way. So what I would do is I have a gas pump that was made out of steel. I'd build it in both of these places, by the way. You could also potentially just build like a door and just build one, but just for the sake of convenience, I'm just going to build two. I'm going to do something like this, and I will provide some power and also hook this up to automation, because I want to vacuum these two rooms out. I want this to entirely be oil or entirely be steam eventually. So I'm going to totally vacuum these out with these two pumps. Let's go ahead and hook them up here really fast and hope we're not overloading our circuit. We might. No, we're fine. We're not even halfway there. Cool. So I would pump these things out. And then what I would do is I would hook up some line from my oil biome, maybe even a separate line, because this line is for a different reason. This line is for refining, and I don't want stuff just sitting in these pipes. So maybe I hook up something separate, like this. Probably make this out of gold so it doesn't overheat. I'm going to run a second line up here. You don't have to necessarily do it this way. I'm just doing it this way for cleanliness. Then I would run this into this room. Maybe on this side, sure. Drop this in here. We'll have some kind of a shutoff on this thing because we do need to hook it up to some kind of automation so we can turn the flow on and off. And we already have power right there, so what I would do is, let's just pretend that we've already vacuumed this all the way out. I would turn off my pumps. And this would be... we need to build all this out before we got to this point anyway. So let me finish building out this room. I would put in a liquid pump in here, probably made out of steel. I would put a liquid vent up in this room. This is where we're going to be dropping water that we're eventually going to be turning into steam. So let me hook that up to something nearby. Sure, why not this? Which I talked about this before. I would probably have some kind of nice-looking water network already set up for something like this. So I'm just grabbing it from a random pool for the time being. And I'd build a bridge. Keep building my pipe until it connected here. So eventually what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a room that's vacuumed out and then starting to fill up with water. I'm going to have a room that's vacuumed out and started building up with oil. So let me pretend like we vacuumed this out all the way. This pump right here is going to be connected to our metal refinery. We're going to use oil, and the oil is going to absorb the heat that is created from the steel, and it's just going to turn it back into energy. So it's a nice little convenient loop for us to use. Let me get this set up the rest of the way. These are both vacuumed out, and they should be connected to the lines that they're supposed to be. So we have oil coming in the bottom room, and we have water going into the top room, which should start flowing here in just a sec. Yep. So let those flow for a little while. And then the last thing to get on here, which if you haven't learned about any steam turbine stuff quite yet, this is a good time to learn about it because steam turbines are one of the best buildings in the entire game. They will basically take any sort of excessive heat that you can then convert into steam, and it will suck it up, it'll generate energy, and then it'll condense the steam back down. So probably have a second port for this. And I would grab my steam turbines here, which will take plastic for what it's worth, but any refined metal ought to do just fine for these things. Maybe create a couple of them, just to be safe. You don't necessarily have to make two. We're just going to do something like this and wall this off. Fill it with some kind of gas. It's going to be good for us to transfer any energy with. I like to use hydrogen, but you don't have to use that if you don't want to. You could even overpressurize this with carbon dioxide. But this hydrogen is just to help us cool this thing down, which we'll talk about in just a sec. The steam turbines need to be connected to this other exhaust, so rather than pumping any of the steam out, we're just going to return the water right back to the source. Also note, and I really glossed over this, my apologies, I am making this bottom room out of entirely metal tile because the hot oil I want to transfer into the steam or into the water as much as possible. So yeah, that's my idea with that. Let's go ahead and hook up power to this thing because this will generate power when the steam is being sucked in. Let's go ahead and do something like this. Hook it up to our heavy watt wire. Sure, whatever. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to cool this room with the steam turbines. So this is going to emulate the setup that's right up here, which is basically having some kind of cold, polluted water and just having it sit inside pipes in order to cool the surrounding area. So, and then flushing it periodically as well. So that's going to be the basic setup. And I've talked about this a whole bunch, so if you've seen any of my other videos, this should sound really familiar. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to snake some refined, or rather some radiant pipe through here. It's going to look something like this. We need some kind of exit point that can fit a liquid shutoff. Like that. And then we will take some kind of cold polluted liquid. For what it's worth, this cold polluted liquid is coming in at about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a whole cooling setup here, and I have a lot of videos about that if you need to know how to create or maintain this cool polluted water. But that's what we're going to be hooking up to. So, say we have a pump in there already, which is nice and convenient. We're going to pump this over into the room. Build a couple bridges, because that's what we do. Where's this coming out of? There we go. We're obviously building through walls and stuff like this because we're in debug mode. So this would be a little bit, excuse me, a little bit more like time consuming to set up. Why is this not set up the way I think it should be? All right. Then what we would need to do is we would need to set where it's going to go out afterward. So I want it to go out, say, through this pipe, which is going to take it either... It should be going back to this room. I may have not set this up entirely in the last video, so let's just go ahead and do that. Let's set it up here. Let me destroy these. Just going to go back into this room to be recirculated and recooled. So that's the whole idea with the cooling loop here. Let's see. This ought to do it. There. We'll get to the full flow here in just a second. Let's finish up our cooling setup, which is just going to need a thermosensor. So this is just going to say, I'm going to be sending cold, polluted liquid in here. This will eventually heat up, because it will eventually be... Oh, we need to dump some of this stuff out, which, let's just go ahead and delete this and rebuild it. We'll do this in a bit. I'm getting really sidetracked. All right, sorry. So we're going to have a bunch of polluted water, cold polluted water sitting in these pipes. And this is going to absorb a lot of the heat that these steam turbines generate, which we'll get to once we have them running. The thermosensor is going to be hooked up to the liquid shutoff. I usually will like to put a buffer gate in here as well. This automation is only saying when we need to get new cold water in the room. So if I want it to be recycled, if this is above, say, like, I don't know, 75 or 80 degrees Fahrenheit, something that's like roughly room temperature, that's when I'll set it to reflush, and then the buffer time, maybe 30 seconds to give the whole room to clear out. To give time for the whole room to clear out. And hook this up to power. So what we have happening right now, just as a very quick recap, is we have oil flowing into the bottom chamber. Notice that it's pretty warm already. We have water flowing into the top, where they're separated by a whole bunch of metal tiles. And on top of the water chamber is going to be a steam turbine. So now that we have this, here's the flow of cold water coming in here. So if I'm hovering over this, it's coming in at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Pretty cool. Not the coldest thing, but this is still totally fine. And then note that it's stopping before this shutoff, so that the water just sits in the pipes until I need more. When I need more, it'll be above 80 degrees Fahrenheit because these things will produce a lot of heat. We'll flush all of the water out of these pipes, we'll get new water, and we'll keep these things cool. When we do flush the pipes, it's just going to travel up here and right back into the room that... This is a dumb piping setup, by the way, but right back into the room that we use to cool the water in the first place. So if you have access to it, you can definitely send it back here, or if you're producing water from like polluted ice, you could do something like that. Just some kind of coolant that's going to keep this room cool while a whole bunch of heat is generated down here. So let me super speed this really fast. Also, you will want to have a lot of this, pretty much everything in here on automation. So I'm going to keep this on automation so I can stop taking water once we get too full. And we already have the automation for the oil, so once we get enough oil, I will go ahead and turn that off. But I want a high volume of oil in here, just so we can absorb the heat pretty well. And transfer it pretty fast. So let me super speed this until we get a good amount of water. There's not an exact amount that you really want to get in here. 300 kilograms per tile is pretty good, so I don't know. I think this is fine. I'll just turn that off. So now we have water in here. And note that the water is just going to continually increase in heat, and that's because the water is exchanging its heat with the oil. The oil is only going to continue to heat up, though, because if we send it into our refinery, which is the whole point of this, the oil that comes back out... Whoops, we want a metal refinery. The oil that comes back out is going to be a lot hotter than what we sent in, but it's just going to come right back in here. It'll get cooled by the steam, and the steam turbines will... Or rather, the steam will get heated up. The steam turbines will cool it back down by condensing it back into water. And there you go. You're actually generating just a tiny bit of energy off of the heat that this metal refinery produces. This is obviously a lot more complicated than just hooking it straight up to a cool slush geyser, but this is an option if you don't happen to have a cool slush geyser handy, even if it is a little bit advanced. We do need to complete this loop, by the way, and send this oil back down in. So I would probably just send it back down in, I don't know, maybe on one side so that I'm, like, the oil is kind of like flowing from right to left or one direction to the other, so that I'm kind of bringing out cool oil here, dropping hot oil back in here, and calling that good. The only thing that you might need to watch out for is if this oil gets too hot, it will turn into petroleum. So that's why I have the steam turbines on here. It'll keep this oil holding at roughly 300 to 320 Fahrenheit. And you don't necessarily need these two steam turbines, by the way. You could get away with one. But another thing you could do if you wanted to really optimize this a little bit is you could use a thermosensor. You could hook this up to your steam turbines and have it only turn on if it's detecting heat that's above a certain amount, maybe like 350. That way you get more efficiency off of these steam turbines rather than just having them run all the time whenever you have hot enough steam. Another couple of things you could do that are not super necessary is you could prevent the flow to this and not have super hot oil sitting in a pipe like this all the time. It's not going to be that bad if you use a pipe that's pretty good. But if you wanted to keep this clear until this thing was empty, you could have this on a cycle to only pump in oil every once in a while, but this is not that bad. You'll also note that I did build it pretty close so that the distance the oil has to travel is pretty short. Oh, this is dumping in stuff that we don't want to dump in because there was still some stuff in the pipes here, so... This is not something that would normally happen if you were hooking it up the better way, but yeah. Let me go ahead and... I think I'll just sample this oil. Just go ahead and fill this in. Just pretend we got all the oil we need. It'll eventually look something like this. Let me turn off the intake for it real fast. And there you go. You don't want to overpressurize these vents either, just so you can make sure you have constant flow back and forth between the two. But now that we have the whole system set up, let's go ahead and see what happens. We have oil sitting in the machine at a pretty high temperature, which again is going to necessitate a lot of good cooling going on here. This will probably produce a lot of heat, so you could use some more aggressive cooling in this area or snake your pipes here a little bit harder. Right now there's actually the wrong type of pipe on there to be good for exchanging heat, so you will want to build that out of radiant pipe, which I'll just go ahead and have them build over it. Or you could kind of snake it like this. Like, you could keep a lot of it in the area as much as you could, and then just kind of send it back out. So I'll just do that really fast, actually. Whoops. Cancel? Now deconstruct? Okay, thank you. So you could do something like this. Kind of snake it around quite a bit, and just have it kind of sit in a bunch of pipes nearby, and then send it back out. That is one of the downsides with the oil, is that it's so hot that it will heat up the surrounding area quite a bit, so this is why something like this is pretty important. Or you can use temp shift plates if you really want to because of the hot oil, but most of the time it should not be that bad. Alright, so the oil's coming back out at 483. This is very hot, so you can see the big temperature difference here. Going in at about 223, coming out at about 483, so definitely don't want to let this get heated up too much. But over time, let me just super speed this really fast. This should transfer all the heat into the water. The water should boil into steam. And once the steam gets hot enough, it can turn on the steam turbines and it will condense it back down. So, yeah, kind of an interesting way to generate a little bit of extra power off of this while still getting the coolant and stuff that you need. So yeah, decent solution here, I would say, especially if you don't have any of the other options available to you. There are some other ways, like I said, that you could get coolant going for your steel system, but I just haven't liked them that much. I did talk about basically destroying it and turning it into plastic or turning it into power immediately afterward. It's alright, but it can get really backed up easily. I don't know. Not the biggest fan of it. By the way, this is coming back down into where we expect. Yes, okay. You could even cheat this just a little bit, by the way. There's a small efficiency I could have here, and that is... let me wait until this flow is done. I could actually make these into radiant pipes so that they transfer their heat into the tiles immediately, rather than waiting to be mixed with the rest of it. But yeah, this will slowly heat up over time, and these steam turbines will keep it cool. I just want to get to that point. Let me make this little efficiency change here. There we go. Alright, I don't know if we should super speed this or if we should just cheat. Let's just cheat. So let's say that we have oil in here that's getting very hot. Let's say, I don't know, 300 degrees, which is about where I expect it to stabilize. This should start boiling the steam. The steam will eventually heat up to a point that these steam turbines turn on. Just to show the rest of this, by the way. It'll take a little while because the heat transfer from the oil will take a little while to transfer into the steam. Oil is not a great conductor. Or rather, it can't store a lot of heat, so it won't really impart that much, which is why the 2 steam turbines might have been overkill. Let's just pretend we meet our threshold of 350 here to get a good amount of power out of these guys. So let's sample. Let's set up some steam that's at 360. Sure, why not? This should trigger the steam turbines to turn on. They'll start powering themselves up. You can see that they're almost at max efficiency. You could really dial this in if you really wanted to. But notice how fast it can recondense this. You could also put this a little bit further away from the place that it actually exits. It's probably a little bit better, actually. There we go. Then as long as this is above 350, it'll keep these things running for just a little while. And then you're just generating a little bit of heat off of there, but also containing all the heat just to this one spot. So, yeah, I think I've beat this setup into the ground a little bit. Let's try to actually dial this in a little bit more. Let's see what is the real max, because I don't think I've ever found this out. I've always just been kind of lazy about it. 385, sure. Okay, yeah, it looks like about 375, maybe just a hair under 200 degrees Celsius is probably pretty good to keep these things about full power. But yeah, this is about what I would do, and this is what I would call pretty good as an option C. Alright, the only last thing you could potentially care about with this is shipping your steel back out. If you really wanted to do that, you could just hook it back up to your original shipping network and just do something like this. Ship it back up. I usually will like to ship this back up to my space area once I have gotten that far, so my duplicates don't have to run it all by hand. And then I can just set anything out of here that I've produced that I want to get out. So obviously the refined metal of, or rather manufactured material of steel is what we want. And I'll hook this up to power and call it good. Alright, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I've pretty much demonstrated the whole idea of this setup. It's pretty decent, I think. So yeah, that's in a nutshell producing steel. And hang on. There we go, 50 minutes. That's exactly what I predicted at the beginning of the video when I was making fun of myself. So yeah, we got ourselves a 50-minute video about producing steel, but hopefully it was nice and informative and gave you a lot of good ideas about how to get that done. Let me know down in the comments if you have any suggestions for improvement or any other ideas that you have related to producing steel. But yeah, that's all I've got for this video. Check out some other stuff that I have coming up here. There'll be a lot of new runs, a lot of new tutorials. We'll be doing some silly stuff in the DLC, so check that out. Until those videos, I will see you later. Hope you have a great day.